So this video is a continuation of last video. Last video we had covered unit number 7, system physiology animal. We had covered cardiovascular system and blood and blood clotting pathway, friends. So in this video we are going to study respiratory system. So the first important topic is that important respiratory states we are going to study. Okay. So I just taken all the notes from article only. Okay. So euphenia means normal breathing. Dyspnea means it is a subjective sensation of difficult breathing. Okay. So paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea means it describes an attack of severe shortness of breath which will wake the patient from sleep. Okay, so the patient has to sit up for catch the breath. Okay, so this normally this is if the patient is been experiencing these kind of symptoms, then this is symptoms of heart failure. Next, bradypnea means it's a respiratory rate that is lower than for the normal age. Okay, so for the each age the respiratory rate will differ. It will be different in the stage of teen, and it will be higher in the stage of older people or elderly people. Next, tachypnea means respiratory state that is greater than for normal age. Then hyperpnea means increased rate of breathing. Agonal breathing means it is characterized by a slow and a very shallow breathing, as well as the respiration will be irregular. So this breathing is result from an anoxic brain injury. If the person have an anoxic brain injury, then he will be experiencing a agonal breathing. Next, apnea means absence of breathing. The patient won't breathe at all. Next, hyperventilation means overventilation above the need for body CO2 elimination. So hyperventilation generally occur in hypoxia condition as well as in patients who are living persons who are living in higher altitude areas. Okay, next is hyperventilation can be derived from a chemoreceptor stimulation due to metabolic acidosis. Okay, next thing is that hypoventilation means underventilation, that is below that needed for a body CO2 elimination. So please make sure body CO2 elimination. Okay, next is Kussmaul respiration, which again our question was being asked from this particular respiration pattern. So this occurs in a patient of diabetes mellitus and diabetes ketoacidosis. So the respiration pattern is deep air respiration pattern called air hunger. So this respiration pattern occurs when the tidal volume is being increased with or without an increased respiration rate. So the tidal volume has been increased, means then it ultimately lead to a condition called Kussmaul respiration. Okay, so it is a form of hyperventilation, and as well as it results from the simulation of respiratory strain in the brainstem by low serum pH. If the serum pH has been low, then it will be stimulated by respiratory center. Ultimately, it will be leading to the this kind of Kussmaul respiration. Next is Boyard respirating pattern. It is characterized by a regular deep respiration interspersed with a period of apnea. Apnea means absence of breathing. Okay, so it is caused by the damage of pons. So you all know pons is present in the brainstem due to stroke, trauma, or unical herniation. Okay, and also this Boyard respiration pattern can be induced by opiate intoxication. Okay, if the person has been intaking opiate in higher volume, then he will be experiencing this particular respiration pattern. Next is that pneumatic breathing. It is an abnormal breathing pattern, and it also results from an injury of upper pons due to stroke and trauma. And this particular respiration pattern is characterized by a deep inspiration with the inspiratory first followed by inadequate expiration. Deep inspiration with the inadequate expiration. Okay, and this breathing pattern has been induced by ketamine, which is also again a drug. Okay. So next thing is that oxygen dissociation curve. So this is a graph representing the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with the oxygen at different partial pressure. So this oxidation dissociation curve will be sigmoidal in shape, which is due to an allosteric interaction or cooperative binding of globulin monomer that make up a hemoglobin tetramer. Okay, it deals with the cooperating binding of oxygen to the 4 polypeptide chain. Okay, so since this hemoglobin is a tetramer, it is made up of 4 polypeptide chain. Next, this graph plots the proportion of hemoglobin in oxygen laden saturated form on the vertical axis. So vertical axis consists of oxygen saturation curve, again a partial pressure of oxygen which will be present in a horizontal axis. Okay, so you should know about all those things which might be asked in CSIR examination. So multiple factors can affect the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen that causes the curve to shift to left or right. So left shift says that increased affinity of oxygen to hemoglobin. In other words, this left shift is promoted when the loading of oxygen to hemoglobin is done. And also this left shift curve will be moving when the hemoglobin is in R state, which is called as oxyhemoglobin state. Okay, so R state is called relaxed state, or hemoglobin is having an oxygen with it. Okay, and this right shift to curve is being promoted by a decreased affinity of low oxygen affinity, and also this right shift will be promoted in case of oxygen has been unloaded, oxygen has been separated from hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin is present in T states or TOT state. Okay, so TOT state is nothing but deoxy form of hemoglobin. So here this is what the thing is. So before that I'll just tell you this pH, that is I can simply tell you, if you can simply study this particular curve, all friends, that is there is a mnemonics is available. Caded phase rise. Okay, so the presence of increased carbon dioxide, increased acidic, that is increased in H plus ion concentration, or decrease, which is otherwise called as decrease in pH, friend. So if there is an increase in H plus ion concentration, or if there is an increase in 2,3 bisphosphoglycerate concentration, or if the person is exercising too much, or if the temperature is increasing, means then the curve will shift towards the right. So here you can able to see. So increased in temperature means ultimately decreased in pH will promote the curve to right. Okay. Factors that move the oxygen dissociation curve to right are those physiological state where the tissue will need more oxygen. For example, during your exercise, muscle have a high metabolic rate, so ultimately they will need more oxygen. Okay. So first pH, a decrease in pH, which is otherwise called as increase in hydrogen ion concentration, will shift this curve to right. Okay, whereas increase in pH or decrease in hydrogen ion concentration will shift the curve to left. Okay, so why means this is occur because a greater H plus ion concentration, at this particular concentration, various amino acid residues in the hemoglobin will be existed in a protonated form. Protonated form means these amino acid will form a ion pair that will stabilize the hemoglobin in a T state or TOT state. Okay, so T state is a deoxy form of hemoglobin, meaning that in this T state the hemoglobin will be lacking an oxygen in that. Okay, the T state has a lower affinity for oxygen than R state. Next is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, a decrease in CO2 will shift the curve to left, while a increase in CO2 will shift the curve to right. So CO2 affect this oxygen dissociation curve in two ways. First, the accumulation of CO2 will cause the formation of carboamino compound to be generated. So this compound bind with an oxygen and they form a carboamino hemoglobin. So this carboamino hemoglobin again stabilize the deoxyhemoglobin in T state. Okay, so what I mentioned you, the accumulation of carbon dioxide will cause an increase in hydrogen ion concentration, as well as the accumulation of carbon dioxide will ultimately decreases the pH. As a result, the curve will be shift towards the right. So in T state, that is start state or deoxyhemoglobin state, the curve will be in a right shift. Next is a temperature. An increase in temperature will ultimately shift the curve to right side, whereas a decrease in temperature will shift the curve to left side. What is the reason means increasing the temperature will ultimately denature the bond that is present between oxygen and hemoglobin, okay, which increases the amount of oxygen and hemoglobin and decreases the concentration of forming oxyhemoglobin. So increasing the temperature will denature the bond between oxygen and hemoglobin. As a result, the concentration of oxyhemoglobin means hemoglobin binded with the oxygen will be decreased. Okay, so the next thing is that organic phosphate. So one example is 2,3 diphosphoglycerate or bisphosphoglycerate. Okay, so this is organophosphate formed in red blood cell during the process of glycolysis. So increase in 2,3 diphosphate glycerate will shift the curve toward right, whereas decrease in the concentration will shift the curve towards left. Left means I said increased affinity, okay, loading of oxygen to hemoglobin will be done. Okay, so next thing is that 2,3 DPG will bind to a hemoglobin and it will rearrange the T state, okay, which decreases its affinity for oxygen. So once this DPG has bind to the hemoglobin, ultimately there won't be no place for the oxygen to get bind. Okay, next an increased concentration of BPG in the vessel will favors the formation of T state, which have a lower affinity state of hemoglobin. Ultimately, at the T state, the curve will be shifting towards the right due to low affinity state of hemoglobin. Next, the concentration which will increase the bisphosphoglycerate means, so in the presence of diminished peripheral tissue oxygen availability, like in the case of hypoxemia, chronic lung disease, anemia, conjunctive heart failure, will increases the concentration of BPG. So during these cases, the oxygen dissociation curve will be shifted towards the right direction. Next, the concentration which decreases the concentration of BPG include septic shock. Okay. So the next thing is that how does the carbon monoxide affect the curve? So carbon monoxide interferes with the oxygen transport function in the blood by combining with the hemoglobin to form carboxyhemoglobin. So this carbon monoxide has an approximately 240 times the greater affinity for hemoglobin than the oxygen. And for that reason, even a small amount of carbon monoxide will tie up a large proportion of hemoglobin. As a result, hemoglobin will not be available for oxygen carrier. And also, if this happens means then the partial presence pressure of oxygen in the blood and the hemoglobin concentration will be in a normal stage, where the concentration of oxygen will be ultimately reduced. So the presence of carbon monoxide, that is carboxyhemoglobin, cause this oxygen dissociation curve to be shifted into the left direction. Okay, so interfering with the unloading of oxygen. Okay, so left direction means there will be increased affinity to hemoglobin. Okay, next thing is that how that methemoglobin affects the curve. So it is an abnormal form of hemoglobin in which a normal hemoglobin, the ferrous form, will be converted into ferric form. Okay, so during the condition called methemoglobinemia, it will cause the person with this particular condition, the oxygen dissociation curve will be in a left shift concentration. As a result, why means the reason is that methemoglobin does not unload the oxygen from hemoglobin. Okay, so for this person, the patient will have an oxygen dissociation curve in a left side only. Next thing is that effect of ITPP. So myoinositol trisphos pyrophosphate is also called as oxy-111A. It is an ionocetyl phosphate. If this present, then it will make the oxygen dissociation curve to shift in a right direction. That is, it will make the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve by allosteric modulation of hemoglobin, which is the red blood cells. Okay. Next, the fetal hemoglobin. So fetal hemoglobin is called as HBVF. It have a different globulin chain to adult hemoglobin. So adult hemoglobin consists of 2 alpha chain and 2 beta chain, but the fetal hemoglobin consists of 2 alpha chain and 2 gamma chain. Okay, so this change in a globulin chain results in a greater affinity of oxygen, thereby allowing the fetus to extract the oxygen from maternal circulation. Okay, so this particular fetal globulin will have a low partial pressure level in the fetal blood. As a result, this fetal hemoglobin can carry 20 to 50% of more oxygen when compared to maternal hemoglobin, and this increased affinity for oxygen means that oxygen dissociation curve for fetal hemoglobin will be shifted to a left hand direction. Okay, next thing is the myoglobin. So there is a distinct difference between the oxygen dissociation curve of myoglobin and hemoglobin. So for hemoglobin, the curve is sigmoidal in shape, whereas for myoglobin, the curve is shift towards left. That is, it has a more of hyperbolic in nature. It is not sigmoidal in nature. The main reason is that myoglobin has a very high affinity for oxygen, and this myoglobin is also acting as an oxygen storage molecule. When you compare the structure, hemoglobin is composed of 4 polypeptide subunits. As a result of the formation of tetramer, they bind to the globulin monomer, will bind in a cooperative nature. So that's the main reason why the hemoglobin curve is sigmoidal in nature. Whereas if you take the myoglobin, it is composed of only single polypeptide, which is a monomer in nature. As a result, there is no cooperative binding will be occur. So that's the reason why the dissociation curve of myoglobin is not sigmoidal in curve. This means that affinity for myoglobin will be greater than that for the hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen. So the myoglobin function is the body is not to carry oxygen, but its access to storage of oxygen only. As a result, every time the oxygen will be with the myoglobin. Whereas if you take the function of hemoglobin, the oxygen has to be supplied all over the tissue. Okay, that's a reason. So primary function of myoglobin is to supply the oxygen to muscle. It does by releasing the oxygen supply to mitochondria, whereas the hemoglobin will supply the oxygen to bloodstream. Okay. Next, the dissociation curve will also undergo a leftward shift in the case of carbon monoxide poisoning. As I mentioned you earlier, this carbon monoxide has 240 greater affinity for hemoglobin, friends. So it will favor the retention of oxygen as well as keeping the hemoglobin in the 10 state, that is deoxyhemoglobin status. Okay, so despite the greater proportion of saturated hemoglobin molecule, the total oxygen content is also decreased because high affinity of carbon monoxide for hemoglobin. So if the person having infected with carbon monoxide poisoning means, then he will be shifted to, that is oxygen curve will be shifted in the left hand direction. Next, in case of high altitude, so for the person who are living in Himalayas or Nepal, they are living in a high altitude where the air quality will be very less. The air quality will be less dense. As a result, the partial pressure of oxygen will also be less. Okay, atmospheric pressure is very lower when you compare with the person who are living in sea level, that is us. So this higher altitude, there is a decreased amount of oxygen in atmosphere. So on inspiration, the person will be having a low oxygen in the blood. Okay, when you ascend to high altitude, the curve initially shift to left hand direction. Okay, at moderate altitude, the curve will be shifted into a left hand direction. That is, left hand means what I mentioned you earlier. Left hand means it is a, so just pasting over here so that it will be very much helpful for you to revise. Okay, shifting in left hand means it is saying the decreased oxygen affinity. So hemoglobin will start to unload all the oxygen molecule. Okay, so at high altitude the curve will be shift to a right hand direction because under the influence of 2,3 diphosphate glyceride there will be increased formation of this diphosphate glyceride concentration. What I mentioned you, if the DPG concentration has been increased and ultimately the curve will be shifted to right, whereas at extreme altitude the curve will start to shift into the left hand direction because there is very much less CO2 in the blood. Again, if the CO2 concentration started to decrease in blood, then ultimately it will shift the oxygen dissociation curve in the left hand direction. Next is, so increase in the main reason is that during the person living in higher altitude will have a hyperventilation, which is a hyperventilation means they started to breathe immediately in a faster way. That is an immediate adaptive mechanism, as well as it will start to increase the 2,3 DPG concentration. As a result, the curve will shift to the right direction because hemoglobin will have a decreased affinity for oxygen. If the hemoglobin is having the oxygen with that, then tissue will be suffering from the oxygen shortage. So what it will do, hemoglobin will just start to unload all the oxygen in order to supply oxygen to tissue. Next is chemo receptor in the carotid and brain will send this low oxygen condition and it will activate the respiratory center in order to increase the respiration, and it also alert another organ called kidney to release the EPO, that is erythropoietin. What this erythropoietin will do means this erythropoietin will activate RBC from the bone marrow so that it will increase the hemoglobin saturation and oxygen delivery. Next we'll see respiratory volume and capacity. So student, please give a look about what are the thing has been given, so they can remove this thing and instead of this they will be asking you which will come in you. So please have a look of this diagram, better draw this diagram in your notebook. So this is what the respiratory and lung capacity. So first thing is the tidal volume. This is called as TV. That is a volume of air inspired or expired with each normal breath. Whereas inspiratory reserve volume, which is called IRV, the extra volume of air that can be inspired over, that is inspired over and above the normal tidal volume when a person inspired with the full force. Then expiratory reserve volume means again this is the maximum extra volume of air that can be expired by a forceful expiration. Next, residual volume, that is a volume of air that is remaining in lungs after most forceful expiration. Next, inspiratory capacity means the inspiratory capacity equal to tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume. Maybe you can refer this formula, friends, which will be very much helpful. If you can't able to remember all those things, you can have a few clue words for you to remember. Next, you should know what about the volume of all those things. The tidal volume in millimeter, they are saying the amount or volume. The tidal volume, it is about 500 millimeter. IRV is around 3000 millimeter, and expiratory reserve volume will be around 1100 millimeter, and residual volume will be around 1200 millimeter, and this inspiratory capacity will be around 3500 millimeter. Next is the FRC, that is functional residual capacity. It is equal to expiratory reserve volume plus the residual volume. So this is the amount of air that remain in lungs at the end of normal expiration. Okay, and vital capacity. So vital capacity is equal to IRV plus TV plus ERV. Okay, so this is the maximum amount of air a person can expel from the lung after first filling of lung to the maximum amount and then expiring to maximum extent. So you should know about this formula alone, as well as you should know about the volume. So this FRC, it is about the amount range around 2300 millimeter, and this VC, the amount range about 4600 millimeter. Next, the total lung capacity. So it is a maximum volume to which a lung can be expanded with the greatest possible effort. So it is equal to VC plus RV. So the amount range is around 5800. Okay, so this is the largest volume, friends, when you compare with all those things. So please take time to memorize all these volumes. Okay, next, the functional residual capacity. So already we studied in this particular thing. Next is the vital capacity. Already we are dealt with the vital capacity. Okay, so please remember these volume, friends. So in the next video I'll definitely share with you some other notes with you, friends. Thank you, friends. Thanks for watching this video.